So, coming to you live off the Alabama coast, just at the edge of a thunderstorm or well needed rain, I'd like to quickly talk to you about Republican moves to restrict voter rights. And of course, by calling it Republican moves to restrict voter rights, I'm announcing my political stance. Many people would say that I'm just telling it objectively. I'm going to tell you I'm not telling it objectively, and I'll tell you why. Recent moves by in local areas and then also by state to further restrict rights of voters, from the voter ID laws to the big thing, I think, that disenfranchises so many voters, and has for so long, not allowing felons to be re-enfranchised. Or there are even some states who allow prisoners to vote, and there are even many nations around the world who allow prisoners, or perhaps some discriminate on the basis of violence versus nonviolent crimes. But then, of course, here in America, we would also ask, even if we were to ask those questions, there are some states who do think along those lines. In the wake of our economic crisis, we know that there are very different kinds of crimes that that are kinds of social violence against people that actually wage wars on the level of physical violence. So, we look at the pariah sorts of lending that affected people, even in this community where I am right now. We've been able to identify that as a real kind of violence, American violence, that we cultivate. Another one that is coming to the public imagination, the public view more now, is bullying, and therefore, coercion, meanness, mean-spiritedness. I remember in the 90s, aging myself, one of those movies that showed that well was The Heathers, and it was one of those movies that caught the wave of, the bitchy girl, that led to and circulated around this, these four women shows that you see all over television, stemming from even the mid '80s. The ditzy one, the Sex and the City people, the Designer Wing people, women people, that kind of show. But showing and deriding gender in that way is, that's an offshoot of the kind of Republican tactics that I really want to get back to, which is why I just want to bring up those kinds of examples to get us thinking along the lines of why it is that voter intimidation strikes such a chord. And the fact that it strikes a chord is also, and that the Republican leaders who speak about it don't acknowledge the chord that it strikes, because you never hear them use words like poll taxes. And I think it's an important term to use in reference to the kinds of bullying tactics that are used to intimidate voters. Because, believe you me, the anti-felon laws, the many, many, many steps it takes for someone who has served their time and proven not to, to be rehabilitated, for them to become re-enfranchised is dramatic, is incredible that we would ask someone, for example, to have to go before a review board after serving their time and et cetera, and proving that they're rehabilitated. We would ask them the number of steps that people do, and even to get denied the right to vote after prisoners serve their time. So they're just two groups of people. And when you talk about voter intimidation and the voter ID laws, I do think that we have to link that voter ID law to two things, and why I think it's important that we call it poll tax. Because today, here in the state of Alabama, that kind of rhetoric is the same rhetoric from the same people and given in the same speeches that chased many so-called illegals away. And so then you see, on the surface, it's linked to illegals today. And so many of us, particularly African Americans, might not see ourselves as a part of that group of people. We're anything but illegal. We might be doing something illegal. Our existence here might be illegal, but we're at least born here. And so when I use words like poll tax, I also want to identify the tactics and the spirit, okay, the two sides, the tactics and the spirit. Now, while Republicans rebut that, the tactics are this, that, and the other, and we pay, you know, Democrats and Republicans play um, chess over whether or not, their tactics are basically playing the race card, the Trump card in the game. When we use words, when we understand our history and use them, when we see that same tactics and spirit, not to say that those tactics or the spirit aren't applied differently in other places, but to see that those two things, when they come together, we have to acknowledge that it is a poll tax, and the poll tax is based on white supremacy. At the time, it probably appealed to reasonable people as reasonable measures. Oh yeah, we should ask voters, to be able to identify, the first 13 states, or the first president, or the vice president who ran before this one, who did that one, and all that kind of stuff, in order to be able to vote. Poll taxes. Grandfather clauses. If your grandfather didn't vote, you can't vote. Well, my grandfather was a slave. Okay, we can't vote. I mean, all those kinds of things that were used to bully, intimidate, and just get around the right to vote. And the fact that the Republican Party doesn't acknowledge that, it's that double dutiness. It's what we call empathy. The fact that there's no empathy on their part. They're saying this is just to protect the very rights that, people such as Martin Luther King marched for. Well, that's not true, because, okay, the tactics might be to look closely into voting. But when you look at the details of it, it's very clear that it's mean-spirited. I mean, look who was targeted. Look who is disproportionately disenfranchised. The people that are introduced at first. The former felons, and people who might not have ID. Now, I mentioned how Republicans tie that to illegals. But then wait a minute now. Look at the number of African Americans who, believe it or not, might not have IDs. And when I think of this, I always hear, again, that Republicans rebut the tactics and not the spiritedness of the moves. And I still haven't gotten to why that spiritedness is important, to acknowledge that. That's empathy. But I, as a person who makes this video, who might be watching this video, who uses social media, also am not a part of the people. I might take an airplane every now and then. I probably drive. I might have a credit card or a bank account. But I think about the number of people who don't fly, who've never been on an airplane, who really don't drive, and they're adults, and they function in life. I mean, the numerous number of people who live outside of my box. And just because I don't live like them doesn't mean that I can project who they should be onto me just because I think I have a good life. Who I think they should be onto them just because I think they have a good life, and just because, I think I'm middle class, or I'm working, and everybody who's in the ghetto slums, the people who do things that are murky, that we don't know about, sort of say, and so we label all these bad things, then we tend to project all of what we want, who we are, how we think life should be, onto them. Well, and so we think that it's reasonable that everyone would have an ID. But even just that one question leads us to look at the spiritedness of why are we so persistent about ID as a form of restricting or enforcing, the borders of voting, versus, for example, registering people to vote, versus, simplifying the process for former felons to vote, or at least advocating for it. You see none of that on the Republican part. In fact, you see no positive advocacy or measures on anything about voting from them. And that's where I say the spiritedness comes in. So they can talk about what they're against. We're against people who don't have ID voting. We're against illegals voting. But until you stand for something, your agenda is hidden. So they're just standing for the All-American. And then, of course, they play the race card of what they think an All-American is. And the most recent thing, of course, is that Obama has never worked for a corporation. And, he's only worked for government agencies and, like, community organizing and stuff. He's social, even though he studied law and taught it. Anyway, he's all social. that's so un-American to like actually have studied and taught and loved constitutional law, wrote a law that is so complex that it really, even their own party couldn't untangle it, like the healthcare law, and yet it takes the Supreme Court to say actually this is constitutional. It takes that many public thinkers to just say that something that Mr. Obama came up with does fit into our narrative of American. And yet we have people day after day contesting what that is because of projecting onto the other who we think American is. It's not just having an ID, so that's what I'm saying. It's the spirit of who we think we are and therefore what an American is. And just, it goes from everything from just me as an individual American. Like in my other video, I talk about meeting an old, angry, self-described old, angry white man who had some ideas about me, about my identity that were so wrong. He could see that I'm black. So he starts saying, well, you must know people who are unemployed who you want to tell them just get off their butts and work. And he kept going on and on about that. I'm assuming the only thing he knew about me is that I'm black and male, and then I told him that I'm gay. I didn't tell him that I'm not Christian. But once he found out I was gay, then he started telling me about narrating the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. So what I'm saying is when we put people in the other box, even when they're physically standing before us, we don't see them as human. We project, just as that man was audibly projecting those words, just as we look at someone who's different from us and wonder, are they an illegal? Are they a thug? Are they a this or that or the other? Are they a rich white man? Are they a middle-class white woman? Are they God-fearing? Oh my God, that woman has a head on her scarf. Well, it's red. Is she a Crip? I said a head on her scarf. A scarf on her head. See how twisted this stuff gets you? So that's all I wanted to say. And I wanted to take the time to say this because I do think that it's important that we think about conversation, that we think about dialogue. So if this is the way that we can talk about it, but we also have to have this conversation with our votes. So however you vote, whatever you think about this, vote. And enjoy nature. And as you vote, think about who protects nature.